The rain had fallen suddenly that Thursday afternoon, rolling over the Boston skyline with a grey heaviness that seemed to press the city flat. Streets shimmered with puddles reflecting the blurry lights of passing taxis, and people hurried beneath umbrellas, their faces buried in phones, their lives sealed tight against the weather. But Adrian Carter, the CEO of a global tech empire, didn't carry an umbrella. He never thought he needed one. He was a man used to glass towers, chauffeurs, and airtight schedules. Yet on this particular day, his calendar had betrayed him. A board meeting that had consumed his team for weeks was cancelled at the last moment, leaving a gap in his perfectly measured life. Instead of retreating back to his corner office, with its wall of glass overlooking the city, Adrian wandered aimlessly down the street, coat collar turned up, shoes darkened by rain. He ended up at a weathered old bus stop, a relic from another era, with peeling green paint, and a bench warped from years of storms. Sitting there in a tailored navy suit worth more than most yearly rents, he looked profoundly out of place, but in truth, Adrian often felt that way, out of place, detached, even in his own world. His coffee sat cold in his hand, untouched, the steam long since faded. He wasn't thirsty anyway. In fact, he wasn't much of anything these days. Life, despite its abundance, felt hollow. His success towered like a monument, but inside it was a cavern. And then, just as he let his eyes blur into the falling rain, he saw her, a small figure stumbling toward the bus stop, thin arms clutching a soaked paper bag. Her shoes slapped weakly against the sidewalk, too big and too worn, her coat clinging to her body like wet tissue. She reached the edge of the shelter, swayed once, and before she could lower herself to the bench, her knees buckled. She collapsed hard onto the ground, the bag spilling open with its pitiful contents, a bruised apple, 2 slices of bread wrapped in napkins, and a battered thermos. Adrian's heart lurched violently in his chest, a sensation so foreign it startled him. Without thinking, he dropped his coffee, knelt in the wet street, and reached for her hand. Her skin was ice-cold, trembling, her little fingers curling weakly around his. In that instant, something in him cracked, the loneliness, the endless grey, the detachment, and all that remained was the desperate need to save this fragile child lying in the rain. Adrian scooped the girl into his arms, with a swiftness that surprised even himself, her tiny body alarmingly light, as though she were little more than bones wrapped in damp fabric. The city around him kept moving, cars splashing through puddles, umbrellas bobbing past, commuters rushing with the indifference of survival. No one stopped. No one even looked twice. But Adrian's world had stilled, narrowed to the shallow breaths against his chest, and the weak clutch of her fingers against his suit. His driver, confused by the sight of his normally impenetrable boss cradling a child, quickly pulled the sleek black sedan to the curb. "Mass General," Adrian ordered, his voice sharper than usual, his control cracking under urgency. The girl stirred faintly, her lips parting just enough to whisper, I have to bring dinner home. Mommy's really sick." Her words stabbed deeper than any corporate betrayal he'd ever faced, piercing him with a grief he didn't yet understand. "Not now," Adrian murmured softly, pressing her closer. "Right now, you just need to hold on." The ride to the hospital was silent except for the rhythmic patter of rain on the roof. Adrian didn't answer his buzzing phone, didn't glance at the emails piling up, didn't care that his hair was damp, and his perfectly pressed suit wrinkled under her weight. All he cared about was keeping her breathing. When they burst through the automatic doors, the triage nurse took one look and rushed forward, demanding a name. Adrian faltered, glancing down at the girl. She opened her eyes for a brief moment and whispered, "Ava." "My name's Ava." Then she went limp again, and the nurses swept her away on a gurney, leaving Adrian standing in the antiseptic glow of fluorescent lights, his hands trembling, rainwater dripping down his sleeves. For years he had been untouchable, insulated by money and power. But now, with one fragile life on the line, Adrian felt helpless. And somewhere inside him, an old wound, the one he thought he had buried beneath decades of ambition, ached with memory. A night long ago, when he too had been small, cold, and unseen, waiting for someone to notice. Hours passed. Adrian remained in the stiff plastic chair beside Ava's hospital bed, ignoring the constant vibration of his phone and the mounting messages from his assistant. His company could wait. The girl before him could not. Ava lay curled beneath a thin blanket, her chest rising and falling with fragile steadiness. When her eyes finally fluttered open, Adrian leaned forward cautiously. "You're awake," he said softly, his voice stripped of its usual authority. Ava blinked at him, her dark eyes wide and strangely calm. "Can I go home now?" she whispered, her voice raspy from thirst. Adrian frowned, caught off guard. "You fainted in the street," he explained. "Don't you want to rest?" She shook her head weakly. "My mom needs me. She doesn't know where I am. She gets worse when she's scared." Adrian hesitated, studying her pale face, the way her damp hair clung to her forehead. There was no fear in her words, no tears, only urgency, as though she had left something precious behind. "Do you know why you fainted?" he asked carefully. She shrugged, pulling the blanket tighter around her. "Didn't eat since yesterday morning. Bread line was long." Adrian's chest tightened. He had spent his life surrounded by excess, meals prepared by chefs, tables groaning under food. And here was a child collapsing from hunger. "And your mother?" he asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted the answer. Ava's gaze drifted to the window, her voice flat and matter-of-fact. "She's been sick since Christmas. Coughs a lot. Sometimes there's blood. She sleeps more now." She said it like a list, as if her young mind had grown too used to hardship to disguise it with emotion. Adrian swallowed hard, unable to find words. For the first time in years, he felt stripped bare, not by a hostile boardroom or financial crisis, but by the honesty of a starving child. Adrian sat by Ava's bedside long into the night, watching her drift in and out of sleep. When dawn finally broke, weak sunlight spilling through the blinds, Ava insisted she needed to return home. The doctors wanted her monitored for another day, but her urgency was unshakable. Against his usual instincts to control, Adrian found himself bending. "If I take you," he said carefully, "will you let me meet your mom?" Ava studied him, her big eyes too wise for her years. She seemed to weigh the trust she could place in this stranger. Finally, she nodded faintly. Hours later, Adrian's black sedan rolled into a forgotten corner of the city where brick buildings leaned tiredly against each other, paint peeled, windows boarded. The car was so out of place it drew curious stares, but Adrian barely noticed. He followed Ava up a narrow staircase that smelled of damp and neglect, every creak under his polished shoes reminding him how far this world was from his own. She led him into a one-room apartment where the air was heavy with sickness and silence. On a sagging bed lay a woman, mid-30s, face pale, lips cracked, a harsh cough rattling her chest. "Mom," Ava whispered, kneeling by her side. The woman's eyes fluttered open, focusing with difficulty before landing on Adrian. Suspicion flickered in her weak gaze. Who is this?" she rasped. "He helped me," Ava explained simply, holding up the bruised apple and thermos she had dropped the night before. Adrian felt the weight of the woman's eyes on him, judgment mixed with gratitude. He cleared his throat, suddenly unsure of what to say. "I found her," she fainted. "She needed care." The woman tried to sit but winced in pain. "We're fine," she said with a dignity that seemed impossible in such poverty. "We don't need pity." Her words stung, not because they were untrue, but because Adrian realized he had spent his life surrounded by people who wanted his money, his influence, his empire. And here was someone who wanted nothing from him at all, not even help. That realization unsettled him more than boardroom betrayals ever had. Ava squeezed her mother's hand. "He's not pitying us. He's kind." The woman's eyes softened, though her body trembled from another coughing fit. Adrian sat silently, his heart heavy, knowing this was only the beginning. Over the following days, Adrian found himself drawn back to that cramped apartment again and again, despite every rational part of him insisting he had no business there. His company began to suffer his absence, board members whispering about his distraction, but Adrian didn't care. For the first time in years, he felt something beyond the sterile glow of screens and profit margins. He saw Ava struggling to make soup from scraps, her tiny hands careful but practiced, and he saw her mother, Elena, forcing smiles despite her failing lungs. One evening, as Ava dozed on the couch, Adrian sat across from Elena, at the small table. The dim light from a single bulb flickered, casting shadows on the peeling wallpaper. "You need proper care," he said quietly. "A hospital. A specialist. I can arrange it. No cost, no conditions." Elena shook her head slowly. "We've been down that road. Tests, bills, promises. It always ends the same. More debt, more waiting, no answers." Her voice cracked with exhaustion, but her pride remained intact. Adrian leaned forward, his eyes sharp. "This doesn't have to end the same. I have resources. Connections. Let me help." Elena's gaze was steady, piercing. "Why?" she asked simply. "Why would a man like you care about a woman like me?" Adrian froze, the truth heavy on his tongue. He didn't know why. Maybe because he saw in Ava's desperation the shadow of his own childhood loneliness. Maybe because he couldn't bear to witness more suffering when he had the power to change it. "Because your daughter fainted in the rain," he said finally, voice low. And no one else stopped. Silence stretched between them. Elena coughed again, covering her mouth with a trembling hand. When she pulled it away, Adrian glimpsed the crimson stain of blood on her palm. His chest tightened. "Please," he whispered, surprising himself with the rawness of the word. But Elena only shook her head again. "If you really want to help, don't give us charity. Give Ava a chance. She's stronger than me. She still has a future." That night, Adrian sat awake in his penthouse, the city glittering outside like 1,000 indifferent eyes. For years, this view had been his pride, proof of victory. But tonight, it felt meaningless. Ava's voice echoed in his mind, "My mom needs me." He thought of Elena's cough, of the bruised apple in that paper bag, of the pride that refused to bow even under sickness. The next day, he returned again, this time with groceries. Ava's eyes lit up at the sight of fresh fruit and bread, but Elena's expression hardened. "You can't keep doing this," she said firmly. Adrian exhaled, his patience fraying. "Would you rather she starve?" he asked, gesturing toward Ava. For the first time, Elena didn't answer. Later, while Elena slept, Adrian found Ava sitting on the fire escape, knees pulled to her chest. He stepped out carefully, the metal groaning under his weight. "Why don't you let me help more?" he asked softly. Ava hugged her knees tighter. "Because Mom's afraid of promises. Too many were broken." Adrian sat beside her, the city buzzing faintly below. "And you? What do you want?" She turned her small face toward him, eyes shining with tears she tried to hide. "I just don't want her to die." The simplicity of her truth shattered him. He reached out, hesitated, then rested a hand gently on her shoulder. "We'll find a way," he murmured. But inside, fear gnawed at him. He wasn't sure there was a way. Winter deepened, and Elena's health worsened. One night, Ava shook Adrian awake with frantic knocks on his office door. She had run through the snow, breathless, coat half-buttoned. "She can't breathe," Ava cried. Adrian's heart pounded as he rushed her back to the apartment, where Elena gasped weakly for air, her body convulsing with each cough. Without hesitation, Adrian carried her to his car, shouting for his driver to move faster. At the hospital, doctors swarmed, machines beeped, oxygen masks pressed to her face. Adrian stood frozen, Ava clutching his hand so tightly his fingers went numb. Hours stretched endlessly until finally, a doctor approached, his face grave. "It's advanced. We can stabilize her for now, but without a transplant, her lungs won't hold." Ava buried her face in Adrian's coat, sobbing. Adrian's throat burned. For the first time in decades, he prayed, not for his company, not for himself, but for a chance, any chance, to save this family. But when Elena regained consciousness, she shook her head at the news. "No heroic measures," she whispered to Adrian, voice muffled through the mask. "Promise me, take care of Ava. Don't let her end up alone." Adrian's chest cracked open with a pain deeper than anything he'd ever known. He wanted to argue, to demand she fight, but the truth in her weary eyes silenced him. He had been powerless before as a child, he would not be powerless now. He squeezed her hand, tears blurring his vision. "I promise." Elena passed quietly 3 weeks later, with Ava curled beside her and Adrian seated vigil on the other side of the bed. The funeral was small, attended by only a handful of neighbors, but Adrian ensured it was dignified, filled with flowers and music Ava chose. Afterward, as snow fell softly on the gravesite, Ava clutched his hand, looking up at him with eyes that were far too old for her young face. "What happens now?" she whispered. Adrian swallowed hard, the answer both terrifying and clear. "Now," he said, kneeling to her level, "you come home with me. And I keep my promise." Ava studied him for a long moment, then slowly nodded, leaning into his chest. From that day forward, Adrian's life was no longer hollow. His office no longer felt like a cage, his wealth no longer meaningless. Each morning began with Ava's laughter echoing through his penthouse, her drawings taped to his fridge, her questions filling the silence that had once suffocated him. He enrolled her in school, sat through her recitals, learned the art of burnt pancakes on Sunday mornings. And though grief lingered, so did hope. Adrian had once been a lonely CEO, drifting through life untouched. But the day he found a little girl collapsing at the bus stop, everything had changed. His heart had broken open, and in that breaking, he had discovered something he had been missing all along, not power, not success, but family.